And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. So, higher education is again emerging as a potential sticking point in the budget negotiations. Governor Andrew Cuomo wants SUNY and CUNY to help jumpstart the state's economy, but he also wants them to do this with a 10% funding cut. Some lawmakers argue that the governor is trying to have that both ways, and they are worried about possible tuition increases that could put these publicly funded schools out of reach for low and middle income students. My next guests are among those who have voiced some concerns. Assemblywoman Deborah Glick is the chair of the Higher Education Committee in her House. Then across the table we have Senator Toby Stavisky, excuse me. She is the ranking member of the State Senate Higher Ed Committee. That's a lot of S's. Thank you very much for your time.
I probably should have married Mr. Aardvark.
Then I would probably mess that up too, believe me. So both of you guys put out very strongly worded statements in response to the governor's budget, which cuts 10% across the board. And last year we saw in your House, Senator, UB 2020 pretty much hold everything up by a guy named Bill Stavisky, who my viewers are very familiar with, no longer with us in the Senate. Let's start with you, Assemblywoman. You were chairing your committee. There's about to be a joint hearing on Thursday. What exactly, I mean, how much of a problem is this going to be for your conference when it comes to the budget?
Well, I think it's really hard to say that we're not going to extend an emergency surcharge on the wealthiest New Yorkers at a time that when they've gotten their federal tax cut extended, and then turn around and say that students, working middle class, poor students at the publicly funded colleges and universities that are all over the state are going to kind of have to figure out how they're going to make do. It's a $150 million cut to SUNY, an $83.2 million cut to CUNY, and the community colleges' base aid is being dropped per student by $226, which is, I think, the largest cut that we've seen.
Now, you know, the governor talks about how these regional economic development councils are going to be partnering with SUNY and CUNY, and he really wants them to be there. Then he puts in pieces of the SUNY Empowerment Program, which would be the public-private partnership piece. The state comptroller has expressed some concern about the audit and the procurement piece. So if, in fact, he doesn't give any extra aid, but he wants the schools to do more, how is that going to be possible?
It's going to be very difficult, obviously. We passed in the Senate a pilot project.
Oh, that's right.
The governor is proposing this for all 64 campuses of SUNY, but we proposed a pilot project involving the 4 university centers. Obviously needed some fine-tuning, but it never went anywhere in the Senate, in the Assembly.
It was like a compromise,
It
right?
was a compromise.
Right?
For example, on the public-private P3, as they're calling it, I understand, the public-private partnership aspect, we suggested eliminating the pre-audit for goods, but not for services, because we were concerned that services would mean an increase in the consultant contracts and subject to possible abuse. But this is a very serious cut that is being proposed for SUNY, and we are very concerned about that, SUNY and CUNY.
Do you think, Assemblywoman, that, and it is true that SUNY Empowerment, particularly when it had to do with access, was the big problem in your conference, if I'm not mistaken? I remember the fight last year.
There were maybe 4 aspects to it. Certainly differential tuition by campus and by program really concerned everybody about a student trying to make a decision where they should go to school. Shouldn't be saying, well, I wanted to study physics here, but that's $1,000 more, and I have 2 younger siblings, so I'm going to become an English teacher and I'll go here because it's $1,000 cheaper. We did not want that to be the calculation, and in fact it was the genius of the Rockefeller administration to level tuition everywhere so that it was based on a student's abilities and interest, not their financial situation. So that was a big concern. And the notion of the public-private partnerships was always very amorphous. And, there might be a public-private partnership that could be evolved that would be supportive of maybe science or engineering programs, but what public-private partnership is going to support English literature or art history? And so there were concerns about a lot of the details. The broad brush, people were like, gee, that sounds great. But when you get into the weeds, it was more confusing.
Okay, so here's the general sort of theme that we're hearing from the governor is everybody has to do more with less, everyone has to pony up, everybody has to cut, etc.
But higher education has taken a cut, not just in the last 2 or 3 years, but this goes back years. It goes back 20 and 30 years. For example, 20 years ago, both SUNY and CUNY, approximately 60% of their operating aid came from the state. Now we're down to less than 45%. There's been a systematic reduction.
But it's still an affordable buy.
It is a tremendous buy.
Okay.
To go to college and pay less than $5,000 a year for tuition, to me, you're getting not only a good economic buy, but you're getting a quality education.
Let me just say that Kiplinger's did a wonderful study that compared the total cost, because somebody's going to Binghamton, they're going to be paying $18,000 a year. They're going to Geneseo, it's probably a little bit more like $16,000. So the notion that the cost to a working family is $5,000 is not accurate. So North Carolina, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill came in at about $15,600. So it is clearly about what state support is there. Now, there's certainly schools that you can point to that are public universities that are substantially higher, but they also, I mean, we've been subsidizing out-of-state students for years,
Absolutely.
and the differential between in-state and out-state in this state is way out of whack.
Okay, so wait. So for two questions. First of all, would you then be okay with the idea of charging out-of-state students more? Both
Absolutely.
You would.
We've encouraged them.
That's right. But we, in our empowerment plan, suggested differential tuition for out-of-state colleges. Let the colleges decide. For example, in Western New York, they have billboards trying to attract students to Ohio. So charging students at Buffalo or some of the Western colleges.
Right. Because Ohio's actually close to
Exactly,
Western New York,
much
right, which
closer.
doesn't seem like that to
Exactly, or
people in the Hudson
Pennsylvania.
Valley. Sure.
And one of the college presidents suggested that, and that's what we included, but I'm in total agreement. It's an imbalance that really ought to be corrected.
Okay. Is there room at all for any cuts to higher ed, in your opinion? Because everybody comes in here and makes a very reasoned argument, a very cogent argument about why their area can't get cut.
I expected cuts. I did not expect a meat axe. And in some instances, if you look over the last several years, the trend in some areas of the budget, there have been increases, which is what the governor was saying, that there are built-in trend factors and so forth.
Right.
The built-in trend factor for higher ed has been on a downward slope for the last several years. And so, while I expected some cuts and figured shared sacrifice, I did not expect that working in middle-class families were going to be hit with what is now, it's really essential for most students to get a college education. That's what we tell them. The president wants us to graduate many more college graduates in the next 7 to 10 years. And yet we're making it impossible for students to get the courses they need to graduate in 4 or even 5 years.
Senator?
And that's been the problem, that we expect students, when I went to college, we expected to graduate in 4 years. Wasn't always possible. Today, it's very difficult. One of the other problems we faced at the City University of New York is the fact that 70% of the students attending CUNY community colleges need remediation in either English or math. To me, that's outrageous. That's
Yes.
outrageous.
Okay. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We're going to be discussing this issue again, like so many issues that we've been discussing here. I want to thank you very much. Thank you, Assemblywoman Glick, and also Senator Stavisky. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stick with us here on Capitol Tonight after the break, because we'll be joined by our insiders. We'll get to hear their latest thoughts on the fight that is shaping up over Cuomo's budget, and reports of an ethics reform bill somewhere taking shape deep in the bowels of the Capitol. We're going to be back right after this quick break.